chat. There's a recording. Hopefully you see the alert pop up on your screen, asking for permission to record. We appreciate that. We do a lot of learning from our meetings like this, so that we can improve them in the future if needed, or leverage things that really work. I'll go ahead and introduce myself first. I'm Beth Sorensen Prince, the Director of Advocacy at United Way of Midland County. United Way hosts equity challenges on various topics. This is our first equity challenge on the topic of disabilities. So we welcome you all. Thank you all so much for your participation. We had about 170 people participate or at least sign up to participate in the equity challenge as a whole this round. So we were really impressed by that. It goes beyond the Great Lakes Bay region as well. We have people literally from around the world that are participating in this specific challenge. As I said, United Way hosts equity challenges on the topics of race, as well as other areas. This is our first disability challenge, and I think it's useful to sort of understand some of the background of why we host these challenges. I could very well come up with some words on my own, but I think United Way of Southeast Michigan, who also hosts challenges, kind of said it best. So how they put it is, at United Way, we know that addressing inequity is critical to accomplishing our mission of building equitable communities of stable households and thriving children. But to do so, we must understand our history and what drives these disparities. When we take it upon ourselves to learn, grow, and educate others, we are doing our part to build a brighter future for our region. So that's sort of United Way's position as far as equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion goes in our community. This challenge, we've had the extreme privilege of working with the Disability Network of Mid-Michigan on reviewing the content, and they in turn are co-hosting the summit with us today. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Kelly Pelong, and she can introduce her team. Along with me, representing United Way is Ashley Kring, who is working things on the back end as well. She's part of our communications team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Pelong, the Executive Director of Disability Network Mid-Michigan, and I have Kelsey Hockaday and Terry Robbins with me today, who you'll hear from a little bit throughout our summit today. Disability Network of Mid-Michigan is a grassroots advocacy organization, and we serve 12 counties in the Mid-Michigan area. And our mission is to promote and encourage independence for all people with disabilities, but our long-term vision is really creating accessible and inclusive communities. So thank you so much for being here today. Your participation in this challenge is really a huge step towards that vision, because we can't move the needle without people like you. So to kick off our discussion, I'd like to highlight two people that we have presented on our next slide who played important roles in the disability movement, and then tell you how they tie into my story. The first person is Ed Roberts, and he's an American disability rights activist who's considered the founder of independent living movement. He acquired his disability later in life, and he used his life experience to change his community. He was a strong advocate for accessibility, and his efforts even led to the first curb cuts being installed in our country. He also facilitated the establishment of Centers for Independent Living, of which Disability Network Mid-Michigan is one of more than 300 across the country. And Ed Roberts is noted for pointing out that the #1 issue for people with disabilities is old attitudes, and those old attitudes often mean that people see us as helpless and unable, but for most of us with disabilities, disability can make us very strong and very able. The second person is Judy Heumann, and she's also an American disability rights advocate, and she's recognized internationally as a leader in the disability community and a national advocate for policy change. She co-founded the World Institute on Disability, whose mission is to continuously advance the rights and opportunities of more than 1 billion people with disabilities across the globe. And the World Institute on Disability believes in the power of people with disabilities to lead, and that lived experience is critical in creating effective policies, systems, services, and communities. Judy also acquired her disability later in life, and at age 74, she's still doing advocacy work today. And both of these individuals are people who have used their circumstances to raise awareness about the value of people with disabilities. And they've really fueled my passion over the last 28 years in the disability field to use my voice to make changes in my communities. Supporting opportunities for people to live the life they choose is not just something that I say, but it's actually something I live. I'm an advocate for people with disabilities having a voice at the table, like Judy, and I'm the leader of one of the organizations that Ed Roberts helped to found. So it's important to me that people with disabilities are able to see themselves represented. And as a person with a physical disability and a person who uses a wheelchair, my current role affords me the opportunity to show others that people with disabilities really can be leaders and serve as powerful change agents. So that's a little bit about some of the folks who came before me and why I'm here today. But I'd really now like to turn it all over to all of you and ask, why did you choose to participate in this challenge? So if you could just take a minute and pop your answers into the chat, then we can talk about that. Why did you guys choose to participate in this challenge for 21 days? To learn more about disabilities and associated challenges, great. Love learning and always shocked by weird things in history that we didn't know. To learn how to help create more inclusive community and share learnings with coworkers, that's awesome. Increase my knowledge of disabilities and how to improve company culture. That's great, thanks, John. Increasing my understanding and becoming a better ally. And to continue to educate myself, be a stronger ally, help address the issues in our society and break down barriers. Awesome. Gain more knowledge about issues people with disabilities have to face, help others understand how to be an ally. Personally feel that someone can be an advocate and help others, increase my understanding of what issues are. Awesome. Lots of great comments. Thank you, guys. And I think really being open to learning about others and considering others' perspectives definitely strengthens our communities and makes us more inclusive. So let's keep the momentum going, and I'd like to turn it over to Kelsey Hockaday to talk about equity versus equality.
There we go. My unmute wouldn't work. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about equity versus equality. These are two terms that are really easy for us to almost use interchangeably without thinking, but they really have different impacts. The 21-day challenge is an equity challenge, and we don't call it an equality challenge. It's an important distinction because equality assumes that everyone benefits in the same way from the same supports, but we know that it's not true. Equity affords different supports, leading to equal access. Equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Equality suggests that everyone is at a particular starting point and should be treated the same. It seeks to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same level of support. Equity, by way of contrast, aims to give everyone what they need to be successful. this is a really good image that sort of shows the distinction between equity and equality, and it also shows you inequity and justice. So in the first image, you see two people under a tree, and the tree is leaning pretty far to the left, and there's an apple falling down, and one person receives the apple. So inequality is unequal access to opportunities. When you go down to the next panel, it shows equality. So now they both have ladders, but we still see that tree leaning to the left. And so evenly distributed tools and assistance aren't always what is needed. In the top right, we see an image where the tree is still leaned to the left, but the ladders are different now. So each person is able to reach those apples. And then in justice, the tree is fixed. So the tools are the same, and the problem of the tree leaning to one side is fixed as well. Both equity and equality points towards treating people in the same way, treating people with dignity, with worth, and with freedom of choice. Both also signify a deep desire that we have that every person has opportunities to reach and fulfill their potential, not only to survive. But equity is what truly considers individuals' needs. Justice happens when we fix the system in place that makes inequity the norm. So in this case, it's fixing that tree that's leaning. When equal rights are equitable opportunities, when equal rights and equitable opportunities are available, that's when we have real justice. So we're going to go into our first breakout room. And in the breakout room, we're going to discuss in small groups some of the things that might have resonated with you through the challenge. What are some things that surprised you, some things that you didn't understand or didn't know, and some things that like you really will take away a better understanding after participating in the challenge.
Thanks, Kelsey. So you're going to slip into the breakout rooms. I'm going to put the question in the chat for your reference, and we'll see you back in a few minutes.
Beth, can you make me the host? Because I think I can't assign you to a room because you're the host.
Better?
Yes. So assign to room 3. There you go.
Goodbye. I think we lost a couple of people right before that breakout, but that's okay. I understand those can be a little scary. But I don't know if you guys wanted to debrief beforehand or dive in. Kelsey and Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think we can debrief. Some of the things that folks mentioned were just the additional struggles that physical access brings if someone, is experiencing regular life challenges. Let's say a person is homeless and then all of a sudden now also needs barrier-free accessible housing. It adds one layer to something that somebody needs to address to be able to live independently. We also talked in our group about a little bit about inspiration porn and about how people with disabilities are living their lives to be a person contributing to the community and not necessarily having the focus on that they're an inspiration to others. And, most of us with disabilities recognize that other people sometimes can see our challenges and that maybe does inspire somebody, but for that to be the focus of who we are it is demeaning. And so people were surprised by that, but also recognize the importance of that. Do you guys have other things you wanted to add?
Yeah, we talked in our breakout room, and a lot of the things that came up were the systemic inequalities. So the difficulties of people with disabilities, who maybe receive benefits like Social Security, even having the opportunity to get married, because that can greatly affect the benefits that they're receiving. Housing inequality, just having enough, access to, barrier-free apartments and things like that. And not only having accessible housing, but the income restrictions that come with these systemic problems that really make it so, like Donna in our group said, someone can be paying $1,100 a month in rent, but a mortgage company will look at their income and say, well, you can't afford a house payment that may be less than that mortgage. So we talked a lot about those systemic problems.
I think we mirrored some of those conversations, particularly about the inspiration porn, which Stella is always a great conversation starter when you hear what she has to say and how she presents her life with a disability. We talked a little bit about access to education and what some of the system structures that are designed to help people complete high school may put up some barriers or potential limitations to future employment opportunities, and how that didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so recognizing that there's still some system structure that's changing in that employment world is a real opportunity for us to do things better. And so we got to figure out what that looks like. We also had one individual who is working on some other projects and ran into some significant communication barriers with someone, and was really surprised at how difficult it was for them to go through what we thought was the standard process, or to access resources that would be more readily available to folks without that communication barrier. So good discussion.
I think it's also important to think about when we talk, especially because a lot of us talked about the systemic issues that people with disabilities face, and to recognize that 70% of people with disabilities are not born with them. So that means a lot of people really could be impacted by the reality of some of these systems that aren't always as accessible. And so, keeping that in mind, that as we move forward in trying to make changes in our community, recognizing that any one of us can join that group at any time and be affected by something that maybe today you're not.
Yeah, and Kelly, we actually touched upon that exact point in our group, and talked about that higher percentage of people who maybe later in life begin to experience some challenges such as that. Another thing that we talked about that was, I think that several of us in our group knew, but again, it's shocking to be reminded of the fact that people with disabilities can be paid a lower wage for the same work that someone who doesn't have a disability it is being paid, and how that can sort of become a vicious cycle that can lead to higher rates of poverty and higher classification in the ALICE population. Another thing that we talked about is the story of the person who had multiple sclerosis and moved to a different state, and because of the difference in benefits was forced to be in a nursing home in that state, whereas in his home state he had been living independently. So again, sort of navigating that sticky system is quite a challenge. One interesting point that Michelle brought up is that our lives are so able-centric, and that it costs more to be able to access just normal everyday things. If you're a person with a disability, and what if it costs more to have a house with stairs instead of a lift? Or what if it costs more to have a car with just regular doors instead of, or the sliding doors instead of the ramp into the car. So we talked a little bit about that too, and how we just have so much work left to do.
Yeah. Awesome discussion. Thanks, everybody. All right, I think Terry's gonna lead us in our next section about breaking down barriers.
Yeah, we've segued really nicely as we've highlighted some of the areas that you all noted as areas of concern. So we do know that there are a variety of barriers in our communities and really in a lot of different categories. So Ashley, you can go back to that PowerPoint if you like. I'll share the screen. But one of the ones that really guides the way that we provide services and work with people are attitudinal barriers. And so Beth, you just mentioned many of our systems are able-centric, and we talked a lot throughout the challenge about ableism and what we might think of old ways of thinking that really reflect low expectations of people with disabilities. And so that's a real first step, is when we can recognize that sometimes the attitude is one of the main barriers that we need to just think about it. If you haven't had an opportunity to think about disability, why would you do something in a different way? And so
Carrie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is it showing the correct screen on the screen share right now?
Yep.
Oh,
you're good.
okay, cool. All right, thanks.
Yep. And then also looking at some of those systemic barriers that we've already talked about. How maybe does our attitude or society's attitude fuel some of those barriers, and looking at things when we are creating programs or systems to say, well, that's the way we've always done it, often reinforces that barrier. And we may be putting up unintentional limits to access by using those old systems. Many of those were developed on a medical model or a helping model rather than supporting and empowering people. So inclusion can be difficult for systems, particularly when they need to make changes, but we're seeing it happen. So we know that it can be done. Many people highlight architectural and physical barriers. They're easier to recognize. You might recall we just celebrated the 32nd anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So 32 years after a civil rights law that was intended to prevent discrimination, and we still have physical barriers to buildings, to health systems, community recreation opportunities. And so we've got some work to do. And that'll be our call here in just a second, is so where do we go from here? And then finally, the information and technology barriers that people are still experiencing. So our access to information has changed tremendously and continues to change with the evolution of technology. Opportunities for people to communicate, as somebody in our group mentioned, in new ways are developing, but they're not always easy to access or sometimes affordable for people. So it doesn't really do any good if we don't have access to that kind of technology, and actually it can increase the gap in knowledge and access to resources if we don't address those things. So what do we need to do? Next slide, Ashley, please. Universal design is one of the conversations that is happening across the world, actually, and really charges us to think about how can something be utilized easily by the most and widest range of people. And so that's a term that you may hear, and it looks at, again, how people access the physical location, how the information is understood, and how people of a lot of different abilities might use it. If somebody can't see, if somebody can't walk, if somebody can't hold something, how would they get this same information? And so there are ways that you can design things that are more user-friendly by a variety of groups of individuals. And that's the idea that universal design calls upon. It's not a special requirement, it's just the foundational way of creating a service or a program. There are 7 universal design principles that talk about equitable use, flexibility in use. That's something simple and intuitive that might include pictures or symbols for some directions. The information's perceptible. There's a tolerance for error. So if you do it wrong, it doesn't mean you get locked out. Doesn't take a lot of physical effort, and that there's size and space for approach and for use. And so when we, at the point of creation, think about designing systems and programs in that way, we're more likely to hit the bar, which far exceeds just accessibility standards, and really is hoping to find ways to include everyone in the design from the get-go. So that will bring us to our next opportunity for a little deeper thought. Again, you were all able to identify some barriers. We've talked a little bit about the different types of barriers that exist, and also have that charge to say, how can we design things better? So based on all of that and what you've seen in the challenge, we're going to have a breakout again, and I would like you to give some thought to what changes you can commit to making, whether it's in your personal life, your work life, or in your community. And so we'll take a few minutes to have that conversation too.
All right, I think everybody's back. If you guys want to go ahead and do a quick debrief of the three rooms.
We talked about folks using their voice in employment and in their communities and recreation, and being able to look at their surroundings and see if things are accessible, and if not, maybe being able to speak out about that, having an awareness about services that might be provided in a healthcare setting, and looking at those things a little bit more closely to make sure that, intakes forms and paperwork and things like that are inclusive to people with disabilities, as well as other physical barriers that could be. And then also sharing, our input in places that are maybe being newly developed or newly built, to make sure that access is something that's thought about prior to rather than after the fact.
We highlighted a few opportunities that people, I think, were experiencing, trying to make improvements that may have even drawn them to this challenge, in recognizing some not visible disabilities, and trying to figure out how to address those effectively, how to support people who maybe aren't ready to disclose that they have a disability, but are experiencing some barriers. Noted some changes already in expanding communication access, particularly to individuals who maybe don't have English as a second language. And that natural extension to, oh gosh, what if somebody can't read or can't hear me? And then one of our members it has an opportunity to create an ERG, an employee resource group, at their largely growing place of work that did not have one for people with disabilities. And so I'm really excited about that charge.
Yeah, in our group, we talked about just having the ability to now take into consideration individuals' unique needs and barriers when you're working with folks, especially when you're working with the public. And if you hadn't been doing that, it's just a new perspective now to recognize that people with disabilities are coming to you from different places, and they might have unique needs and barriers that need to be addressed before care can be given. And we also had a lot of buzz about the inclusive design, and that was the universal design, being inclusive in that, and how can we recreate sort of that idea in our workplace, in our personal life, when we're building new programs, when we're working with the people that we work with. How can we change little things to make it just universally accessible from the get-go? And then we also had some personal reasons, some personal changes that they want to commit to is, we had someone who had been taking ASL classes, and they said, I'd love to continue doing that and just increasing my access and getting more practice. And they're actually going back and teaching what they've learned to their nieces and nephews to sort of continue the momentum of, that increased access and things like that. So we had some really great discussion in our rooms as well.
Awesome. All right, you want to talk about how to be an ally, Kelsey?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about allyship and how true allyship is different from performative allyship. So on the left of the slide, you're going to see someone who says, be a better ally. And there's 5 tips on how to be the best ally for people with disabilities below that. Those tips are stop using the term bound to describe our relationship to our mobility devices. In general, people who use wheelchairs do not like to be called wheelchair bound. You know, that's an assistive device that they use for independence, but it's not a part of who they are. Hire people with disabilities. That's one of the things we talked about in our small group as well. In your workplace, do you see people with disabilities? Are they visible to you? Stop making content about us without us. And this is a big one. A term in the disability rights movement is nothing about us without us. We're starting to see some more representation in media for people with disabilities, but we want some true representation. We don't want actors without disabilities being cast to portray people with disabilities. There's a lot of actors out there who have disabilities who would love to show you some authenticity about that. Change cannot happen without us. All justice is disability justice. Disability is one of those marginalized groups that's really different because it affects everybody in every group. You know, so you're not more likely to have a disability if you are white or a woman. It affects all marginalized groups. So justice has to include disability. Don't stop inviting us places, even if it seems like we won't show up. You know, we want to be a part of it. So allyship is, an ally is someone from a non-marginalized group who uses their privilege to advocate for a marginalized group. Being an ally is a good thing. And performative allyship is also sometimes referred to as ally theater, or sometimes also referred to as slacktivism. It's when someone from a non-marginalized group professes support and solidarity with the marginalized group in a way that either isn't helpful or actively harms that group. Allyship is a strategic mechanism used by individuals to become collaborators, accomplices, and co-conspirators to fight injustice and promote equity by using their privilege to advocate for historically excluded groups. Being an ally requires recognizing the advantages, opportunities, resources, and power that you have automatically been accorded to because of you being a part of a privileged group. Allyship is about showing up for historically excluded groups authentically and not just with surface level activism. Performative allyship maintains the status quo. Performative allyship is done to increase social capital rather than being driven by a devotion to the cause. Performative allyship can also sometimes look like centering yourself. Are you benefiting from your actions? Is it virtue signaling? Is it public displays of support that don't really align to your actions to help improve systems? When you have authentic allyship, there's an obvious and a genuine attempt to transfer the benefits of privilege to those who don't have it in order to support more marginalized groups and to support them to achieve systemic change and justice.
Awesome, thanks. So I think now we just want to kind of wrap up with a final discussion. If you want to pop some answers into the chat about what improvements should we make toward disability equity and inclusion?
And you can go ahead and pop your answer right in the chat.
Hiring people with disabilities, yeah. At an equitable wage.
At an equitable wage.
I think we talked a little bit already about people with disabilities in decision-making roles. Good. Challenge ableist thinking. Awesome.
If you see something, say something.
Yeah. Amen, Michelle says. Awesome. Yeah. We talked about thinking about people with disabilities while planning events, whether it's a building, it's an activity, it's an expo, It's a service you're providing. And then like we already said, I think true media representation, identifying ableism as it happens. Michelle says nothing will change if we don't say something, engage in dialogue, stop accepting status quo. Awesome.
Good job, Michelle.
Continue to challenge equity versus simple equality. Yep, awesome. Highlight problematic job descriptions that have nothing to do with the actual job. Create barriers. Yep, keep shining a light on inequity. Awesome.
A lot of amens.
Amen. Yeah, yeah.
I love that energy.
I do too. That's awesome. So I guess if we, as we just think about, oh, there's one more here, there's general hostility in communities today, and that needs to be toned down in order for people to be enlightened. Dialogue about inclusive needs. I think that's a really good point, you know, if we can all, whether it's disability equity, whether it's racial equity, no matter what it is, if we can all just stop and, you know, think about people as people, I think we can definitely move the needle.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
another comment on that, you know, whenever you're learning and engaging in learning about equity and inclusion and diversity and all of those things, it should never be about being wrong or making mistakes because we'll all make them. But really it should be about uplifting those historically excluded groups and just creating more inclusive environments. And so if you're engaging with someone and really the outcome and the focus is about inclusion, and it's about, you know, building that trust in your communities and building that support, naturally that dialogue is going to be better accepted and things like that. You know, you don't want to engage people in it and saying you're wrong, so you need to learn this, because that's not helpful, and that really increases people's defense mechanisms and makes it harder for them to see what you're saying, because they're going to agree with you, you know, if you want to have that conversation.
Yeah. And Michelle also said challenge the ADA minimum accessibility guidelines. Just because it meets the requirements doesn't mean it's accessible. And I think we
Love that
get a
one.
big
Yeah.
amen on that one for a lot of us. Yeah. Yep. So just to wrap up, if we just want to pop to the last slide about what you can do now. We have some examples for you. Disability Network has an off-the-shelf book club where we focus on books that are either written by an author with a disability or a disability topic. So you could check out our website and join any of those groups at any time that you would want. Also, maybe think about starting one in your community or with your friends or at your place of employment. Another thing you can do is to join an advocacy group, whether it's advocating for more accessible transportation or more accessible housing or healthcare equity. We need all the advocates that we can get. If you or somebody you know has a disability that would like to be a mentor to somebody else with a disability, that's an awesome way to continue this journey. You could also host a disability awareness training at your business or your organization, or request an accessibility review to make sure that your buildings, your offices, your facilities, your locations, even your policies and practices are accessible. And then also think about consulting with people who have disabilities, because really we are the experts in disability when you're planning events, so that you can make sure that things are more accessible and inclusive. And then lastly, sharing what you've learned with your family, friends, and community, like a lot of you have talked about. So I think we just want to say thank you so much for participating in this challenge and being open to learning new things and taking to heart some of the things that you were surprised by. And you can reach out to any of us at any time if you have questions or need more assistance with anything. And thanks so much for being a part of helping us create accessible and inclusive communities.
Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.